Well, the other thing Mike Burgess has been warning about, aside from cyber attacks, is, of course, the risk of opportunistic terror attacks because of what's happening in the Middle East. And we're already starting to see violence around the world with these pro-Palestinian protests in Los Angeles. Just the other day, we talked about it last night. A man was killed when he was hit on the head by a pro-Palestinian protester. Shari Markson spoke on her program on Sky this afternoon about a Sydney man who was beaten when he took a poster down off a wall that was promoting Palestinian protests. And in the UK, a 78-year-old war veteran has been kicked and punched by protesters when he was trying to sell poppies and got in the way, accidentally, of a pro-Palestinian march. Now, this raises a very important question coming up this weekend because, of course, it's Remembrance Day, which is huge in the Allied countries, but particularly in the UK. And so everyone from the Prime Minister down has appealed to anti-Israel protesters. Could you just cease protesting just for this one day so that our war veterans can be remembered? But those people who keep chanting for a ceasefire apparently don't believe in a ceasefire themselves. And so they're going to end up with more than 70,000 pro-Palestinian protesters marching through the streets at the same time as the Brits are trying to remember their war dead. So it's a recipe for disaster. But what I thought was interesting was the First Minister of Scotland, who is himself the first Muslim leader of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, he got very upset with suggestions that pro-Palestinian protesters should just lay off the protesting just for one day. And he said, and I quote, "I'm beyond angry at the Home Secretary and the UK government who seem to want to drive every issue into a culture war." Oh. Now, if you can't see the irony in that, you've got thousands of Muslims wanting to march through UK streets calling for the elimination of Israel, and anyone who objects to that is accused of waging a culture war. Can you believe he used that language without any hint at all of irony?
This is exactly what we've been talking about in terms of the cultural war in the West. And the fact that there are those who have been allowed into these countries who do not respect the customs, do not respect the traditions, do not share our culture, do not share our values, and have absolutely no interest in doing so. They have come here to throw their weight around, and this is how we throw our weight back. What you're about to see is a group called Pegida, which stands for Patriotic Europeans Against the Islamization of the West. Look at this massive crowd. This is in Dresden, Germany. And the audio to this video is also incredible. But here they are. They've been up and running since 2015 because they have noticed their country changing and they don't like it. You are welcome here. Welcome, enjoy the country, but respect it and don't expect us to change for you. We've got to see this kind of rhetoric, hopefully from our MPs, those who are completely unashamed, what some would call Trumpian politics, in saying America first, America's best, I fight for America's best interests. I mean, when we see people like Marine Faruqi get up in our Senate in that hallowed hall of power, you've done very well out of our country, lady, and you condemn us, you take our government to task for not doing what you want. It is perfectly reasonable to go, well, hang on a minute. Can I trust you to stand up for what's in Australia's best interests? Like standing with our long valued and only ally in the Middle East, because that is what is best for our nation. So when it comes to people who are drawing on their culture or perhaps their ideology or their religion in order to push their agenda in our parliament, the Australian Parliament, I'm sorry, how am I supposed to trust these people to do what is genuinely right for the country? I can't.
The other thing politicians have got to be aware of, and it's amazing scenes in Dresden, that huge crowd of people saying we are sick of this multicultural issue. We just want everyone to live in harmony. We are Germans first and foremost. Here in Australia, we're Australians first and foremost. If politicians ignore that and the general populace start to feel like our political leaders are not listening. Not only that, but law enforcement are not acting. Then they really are going to have a problem because the West is very tolerant. We've been taught to be tolerant. That's who we are. But there will come a point where if governments don't start to clamp down on some of the rubbish we're seeing, people will start to think, well, if the government aren't going to do anything, if the police aren't going to do anything, we love our country, we'll start to do something ourselves, then we'll have a major problem.
Yeah, and we've been here before. If you go back to sort of 15 years ago, when we were looking at Islamic terror on the streets of Australia, we were having these discussions. Now, for the last 5 or 6 years, things have been a bit different. Things have been reasonably calm, and so we all sort of forgot about it.
We had COVID.
We did have COVID. Thanks to what's happened in Israel and Palestine, it sort of brought these tensions back up again. And I think for the first time in a long time, we're starting to see that result in violence and this sort of thing. And what you saw with that bloke, Jim Henderson, the 78-year-old poppy seller in Edinburgh, goes to the nub of the issue, that none of this is actually about Israel versus Palestine, or for a lot of the people who are going out and marching for Palestine, a lot of it is not about Israel versus Palestine. It's about the West versus the rest. Mm-hmm. Because what they're going out talking about, many of them born here, never been to Palestine in their lives, many of them, middle to upper middle class, educated white people who have no connection to the Middle East whatsoever. What they're displaying is their Western self-loathing, which is why when they're conducting a protest and they come across a 78-year-old veteran who's selling poppies, who has no beef with them at all, is not saying anything to them, is not engaging with them in any way, he is still a target. He wasn't waving an Israeli flag or telling them they were dogs or whatever, but he's just peacefully selling poppies to commemorate veterans, right?
Because he loves his country.
And because he is there celebrating and commemorating symbols of Western power, he is a target. So it's not just about Palestine, it's about everything else.
And the great irony is it was his generation and their war service that created the freedoms for pro-Palestinian people to march through the streets demanding their crazy demands.
It would be a very different world. And speaking of some of this stuff, take a look. This is a scene out of Melbourne where there's a Palestinian rally going on. Someone turns up peacefully with an Israeli flag and stands there. Doesn't appear to be jeering at them or creating any issue. And of course, one of the protesters, who you will see is a white person, I'm assuming has very little connection to all of this, decides to come up and rip the flag violently out of their hand. Take a look.
Every single day, these people are trying to work, to study.
It's just typical. They can't make their point without getting aggressive because aggression is the point.